So, today we're going to do three things. First, we're going to go over your group project requirements, which were posted as an announcement earlier today, and the timing. Second, based on some conversations with the TAs this morning, we were kind of covering the group project requirements. They said that 80% of you struggled with the Walmart assignment and either lost points or got no credit at all. So based on that, I think we really need to go back over the multiples and what we really need to do. So we're going to do that, and there will be a graded in-class assignment on the multiples. And then the third part is that you're going to be presenting this stuff, and I've asked for volunteers to practice with the presentation and gotten crickets. So today, if I get a volunteer that's willing to do it, they get extra credit. So anybody that wants to volunteer gets some extra credit points towards your semester grade for presenting the analysis right after you turn it in at the end of class today. So those are the three things we're going to accomplish. There will be a graded homework assignment that'll be posted later today that'll be due on Monday, which is the other area of practice that I think you need for your group projects. So, and again, on Monday we'll go over a lot of this stuff as well. So that's what's coming up. But first things first, I want to talk about the group projects and the timing of this. So basically, there's going to be two deadlines that are going to matter to you. The first deadline is a week and a half away. It is going to be Monday, November 24th. On that date, you are going to turn in a PowerPoint file, and on that date, you're going to deliver a 10-minute graded presentation covering all four sections of your group project. On that date, in addition, you're going to turn in your group project write-up for the company you were assigned and your final Excel valuation file. Okay, so that's the Monday before Thanksgiving. Now, here's what's going to happen, is that because we have 7 groups and we have a class that's about 75 minutes long, that's why it's 10 minutes per presentation. So I'm going to have my iPhone with the countdown timer. I'm going to start it at 10 minutes, and when it hits 0, you're done. Even if you're in mid-sentence, I'm going to have to cut you off because we've got to get all 7 teams to present during that final class period. And then I will give you a grade. And half your grade for your group project will be based on what you submit on Monday the 24th. So half the PowerPoint grade and half the paper grade are going to be based on what you submit that day. All right? Same thing. 10 a.m. that morning, you're going to submit your paper and your spreadsheet. All right? By that following Monday, we'll then give you the grades on the paper and the spreadsheet as well. TAs and I talked this morning. We're going to try and do that Thanksgiving week. That means the following week, you're going to make your corporate presentation to our corporate sponsor and myself a second time. That PowerPoint will be 20 minutes, so you have more time to do it the second time around. And you'll then resubmit the paper on Monday, December 8th. Okay? And between getting it back and resubmitting, you have a chance to then make edits, make changes, improve upon it. So hopefully what you submit is much better and a perfect score for the other half of your group project. Plus, that final PowerPoint and that final paper are going to be given to the company. Okay? So please make sure we don't have any grammatical errors or formatting problems and make the second one look really good. Right? Because it's not only for your final grade, but it also represents us. And that's important because if anybody saw the Business Week announcement, Maryland is now 17th in the country for business schools. So that was actually shocking, to be honest with you, that we went up by like 8 points or 7 or 8 places. That's a pretty big jump in the poll. I don't know if anybody saw this. Duke is now number 1. Which I think also probably shocked a lot of schools, particularly like Harvard and its ilk, Stanford, are probably unhappy that Duke jumped ahead of them. But Maryland's now 17th in the country. Now, that was MBA programs, but it does have an umbrella effect on the perceived undergrads. Yes?
Yeah, I was going to wonder if the undergrad performance even impacts that score.
It doesn't, but I'm telling you that when they think of the business school, if you're an undergrad at the business school, they're going to think better of you. What's interesting is Business Week actually listed the 3 criteria. The number 1 criteria was Maryland ranked number 1 in the country based on student scores. So apparently 45% of the ranking is they survey alumni and basically said, what did you think of the school that you just graduated from? And we were number one based on student satisfaction scores out of any university. We were last out of the top 50 in employer point of view. So the employers still think we suck, but, and by the way, this is being recorded, or the employers think that we have a lot to improve upon. How about that? Because we were ranked like number 51 on employer perspective, but we were number one based on student experience, and we're kind of in the middle of the pack on research. But that's something we want to change. And that's part of why we're doing this corporate exercise. Is there's a lot of really good students here, and the corporate world just doesn't know about it. And we're not helping ourselves getting the message out. But I'm telling you, now that we're ranked 17th, I think it's going to start spurring some corporate employers. Anyway, so back to this. Here's what you need to do for your PowerPoint and your paper. These are the requirements. Now, I want to be very clear. This is a finance class. This is not a management or marketing class. That means your paper and your PowerPoint can't be all fluffy, right? Which means you have to back it up with data. You can't just make stuff up, right? I know in the other classes, that's what you do. In this class, you can't just make it up. It's got to be data-driven on your presentations. Now, here's the other thing. Particularly when you only have 10 minutes and you only have 12 pages, I don't want you to just make it regurgitating the data. Assume that you're presenting and writing to an informed user, which means we already know about these companies. You don't have to give us a company history. We already know the process that you went through, so you don't have to go explaining, this is how I calculated ROIC. That's just waste of time, right? So we are informed consumers of your data, so assume we know how you've done all of the process and focus on the key elements, right? So what are the key elements? Here's the 4 sections. First, EIC, okay? Again, what is required? You have to give exhibits, right? These are the minimum exhibits. Exhibit number 1 in the E section is the beta. Exhibit number 2 in the E section is the 5 forces analysis, a table. And exhibit number 3 in the E section, EIC section, is the RV screenshot of the industry spread, right? So those are the exhibits, right? But here's the point. What I really want you to answer the question, that's why I put it front and center, is this an attractive industry today? And is it going to be more or less attractive in the future? So to be honest with you, in the Novellus presentation, watch that video, look at those slides, and they did a really good job of talking about the attractiveness of the aluminum industry, right? And so let me give you an example of what I mean. I want you to focus on the highlights, referring to the data, but I don't necessarily want you to just regurgitate the data, okay? So think about this, EIC, which is, and I'm going to take one other tangent here. Did anybody see the news article last night coming out of China about Obama and Z? Yeah. That's right. That basically Obama said we're going to go even further with carbon emission reductions than what we originally said we were going to do. Now the Republicans immediately said, no, we're not. Okay, but so there'll be this little political fight. But nonetheless, and then China said, we're also going to go further and we're going to start slowing our emissions versus just letting them grow and grow and grow. So that was to some degree a big deal. Here's why it matters, because if you think back to the aluminum industry, one of the cases is, will the automobile industry do the switchover? Well, if the governments kind of hold firm, it's more likely that they're going to do a switchover. That's why we pay attention to the news, by the way. But let's go back to this. So EIC. Aluminum industry, which is okay attractive today, is going to become more attractive because by 2025, the governments of the world are going to be enforcing much tougher fuel economy and emission standards, which is going to cause a transition from steel to aluminum as they go from heavier to lighter cars. And the average car is going to go from having about 300 pounds of aluminum to about 550 pounds of aluminum during this transition, which means that there's going to be tremendous growth in the aluminum industry as everybody converts over, and this industry is going to grow at a rate of 25 to 30% compound annual growth for the next 4 years. That means that the EBITDA margins are probably going to improve because the buyers, the auto industry, is going to have less power because they have to buy from the suppliers, even though it's a commodity, and the supply-demand balance. There's a lot of demand for the supply, which means that the rivalry is probably going to be a little less intense, and the players in this industry are going to make more money and have better pricing. I don't know if anybody timed me, but I think that was less than 2 minutes, and that highlights the key elements that we wanted to put in there. And then I could do a throwaway line like, and oh, by the way, this industry does have a pretty high beta, so it will be tied to the economy. But as long as the economy doesn't change, the government's sort of pushing these emission standards, and the automobile manufacturers don't see a big drop in their sales, then you probably can expect that the conditions are likely to be this and a better industry going forward. That's what I'm really looking for when you get into the EIC conversation. Because again, you're not going to have a lot of time for the first level of presentation. Now you have double that time when you go and do the big presentation. But here's what I'm telling you. If you went through 5 forces, force by force, right, and you went through the today and the future and tried to explain that whole table, there's 10 minutes right there and you won't get to anything else. And that's what I'm saying. Time is going to have to be very, very specific. So that also means that you don't have to have every group member participate in the presentation. Originally, and what I've done historically, is everybody has to participate. For purposes of this, you're probably going to narrow it down to 1 to 2, maybe 3 people. Right? So essentially find who's going to participate, have them deliver your presentation, make sure they got it down, but basically that's going to be the only way we're going to cover all 4 sections in 10 minutes during that week. Now this is also very important. You're going to get a group grade, right? Which means that everyone has to participate in creating the presentation. Everybody has to participate in creating the paper. So there's going to be peer reviews. And I'm going to weight the peer reviews more to the people that are presenting. Because if the people who are presenting basically said, we did all the work on the presentation and none of the rest of our group members helped, then you're not going to get any credit for your group project and you're probably going to end up failing the class. Because when you get a 0 for the group project, you will not be able to pass this class. So it's going to be very important in the peer reviews that you don't put the burden on all the work has to be done by the people presenting. That will not be fair. And if you're peer reviewed down, it would be tragic. So let's not see that happen. Same thing with the papers. So you still all have to collaboratively work on the paper and the PowerPoint, even if you're not the one in front of the room presenting. Okay, questions about that? Section 2, historical analysis. You're going to have to do the enhanced ROIC tree, and you're going to have to do the CFI. Right? And you might say, what is the enhanced ROIC tree? That is the homework assignment that you're going to get this afternoon that is due on Monday. Here's what I mean. If we look at our valuation model today, and we look at the ROIC tree, we have the ROIC tree for one company on this page. But if we do the valuations and we do the multiple analysis on our peers, we're going to have 6 ROIC trees because we're going to have 6 models. I want you to aggregate them and put them together into one ROIC chart. So if this were Walmart, Target, Costco, Family Dollar, Dollar General, ROICs all next to each other. Walmart, Target, Costco, pre-tax ROICs, cash tax rate. So all 6 ROICs in one super tree. Okay? And so what you're really giving me is the historical ROIC for the industry as opposed to just your company. So you have to cover your company and the industry, and you got to be efficient. CFI, you're only doing your company. All right, but ROIC tree, I want you to do it for the industry as well. And as I said, you're going to practice this for Monday's homework. Next, that's section 2. Section 3, and you got to put the super tree and the CFI in there. Section 3, multiples analysis. This is the area where many of you are struggling. That's why we're going to practice that as an in-class assignment today. But specifically for your multiples, what I want you to cover, and I'll go back to the Walmart assignment, is the margin growth in ROIC, and it's really spread. Just remember we did Family Dollar, how they had this really low WACC, which was distorting the multiples. But basically, these multiples are explained by those factors. So that's what we're really trying to relate. How do those multiples help us, how do those factors, the ingredients of the multiples, really get us understand the multiples? That is that 3rd section. So you're going to need the multiples table, and you're going to need a spreadsheet that looks a lot like this which gives the forward multiple numbers for margin growth and ROIC of the companies so that we can tie that together in our explanation. Section 4, the valuation. You're going to do an as-is valuation. You're going to do a final valuation. You don't have to turn in your as-is model because it's going to look a lot like the final model, and I already know what the share price is going to be. It's going to be the current share price. Right? Now, you're going to turn in an Excel file of your final valuation, and you're going to have your Excel file ready as part of your 10-minute PowerPoint. But like I said, you're not going to have in 10 minutes the time to go through all of it. So what I want you to focus on are what were the key assumptions, which the multiple analysis should have helped you with, that you put in for the as-is, and what changes did you make and why to get to the final valuation. Okay, so that's what's going to be most important to talk about in the valuation, and then based on that, create a target price and a buy-sell hold. Okay, that's the presentation. Now, you're going to do the PowerPoint and the paper independently. The paper, again, approximately 12 pages, 10 to 12 point, double-spaced, plus exhibits. So think about 3 pages or so per section. It's not a hard limit. If you need to go longer, you can go longer. But as I said, focus on the highlights and what it means. All right? And make sure the exhibits are in there. If you find other exhibits you think are necessary, feel free to put those in as well. But these are the minimum exhibits that I want to see in the paper. And the minimum exhibits you want to be referring to in the PowerPoint slide. Again, questions about any of that? All right, so let's talk about multiples. This is the section that you're struggling with. And here's why. So I asked my TAs this morning. We met for like 45 minutes before the first class. And I said, you know, how are they doing multiples? And that's where they said 80% of you from grading the Walmart assignment, they felt were really struggling with this assignment. And here's why. It's different. This is brand new. And the reason it's brand new is that Mike and Yulia, who took 443, are now graduated and they're in the master's program. So they went for undergrad, they went straight into the MSF program, and they're both going to get their master's in finance in May of next year, and they're completing it in 1 year. So they just did it as an add-on. And they're both super smart. But here's the point. This semester in the master's program, which is supposed to be far more quantitatively advanced than the undergrad, when I asked them if they did multiples, and they said yes, they said they didn't cover anything different in their master's program than they did in the undergrad. And nowhere in their undergrad career did they do what we did in this multiple analysis. So what they reinforced to me today is what you're getting from multiple analysis is actually pretty advanced and pretty new, because you haven't seen this before. So that's why I think it's important to kind of go through this. However, it doesn't mean I want to pull back. I actually think this is very useful information, because this, and I'll go back to, this is what makes McKinsey good, because even a lot of banks don't do the analysis that we're doing today. What people do is they do averages, and then they just basically infer some data in the averages, and there's a lot of glossing over stuff because the people that are really doing the multiples don't truly understand why multiples are different. All right? So here's what we're doing that's different, is I've shown you the key value drivers formula. And I've shown you, and many of you probably didn't read the book because this is buried in the multiple sections, so it's good to actually read the chapters. But basically, this is the derivation of how we go from key value drivers formula to enterprise value to EBIT. Right? And so here's the point. Think of this as we're a chef preparing a recipe. These are the ingredients that lead to the final product. Now, here's the thing. If I had given you the individual ingredients and I said, here's a tax rate, here's a growth rate, here's an ROIC, here's a cost of capital, calculate the enterprise value to EBIT, that would be very straightforward. What I'm actually doing is saying, work backwards. Here's the enterprise value to EBIT, tell me about the ingredients. That's harder, but that's really the process that we're trying to do. But what I'm really doing is I'm telling you, these are the key ingredients in the recipe, right? And we're trying to figure out what balance of those ingredients are in that recipe, but nonetheless, you actually are getting an appreciation for the actual ingredients that matter to this formula. That's what's kind of new here, because most people don't do that disaggregation. So here's the other thing. The other key formula I'm showing you is the derivation of the enterprise value to sales, or enterprise value to revenue formula. Again, from key value drivers to enterprise value to sales. And specifically, I'm showing you that the enterprise value to sales is the enterprise value to EBIT times the margin. Okay, so those two derivations are what's quote unquote new that a lot of people don't see and that we're actually using as the basis for our multiple analysis. Here's the other insight that Yulia had this morning, which I think is a very good one. When we do our valuation model, what you typically do in the real world is you go out 5 years, and in this class we're going out 10 years, and then you do a perpetuity. But the multiples by definition are a perpetuity from day one. Right? So when you do a multiple, you're actually doing a perpetuity from day one of the company, and you're not really doing a 5 or 10 year forecast before you create that multiple. So that's what we're actually observing in the class today. And so what we're really trying to say is, if we did a perpetuity in the company from day one, what would the ingredients look like that explain that perpetuity to give us a sense of what the long term looks like? Now, every now and then, when we back into these ingredients, things don't make sense. That's okay. I'll give you an example of this. Let's say the market's down because people are worried about the economy and they're just selling everything, and the portfolio people are just rotating out of a sector. Well, that could actually make these numbers not make any sense when we work backwards, because the company's valued poorly, not because of anything the company did, but because of a macroeconomic issue, right? We'll see that when we do this analysis. That's why we do final valuations versus as-is valuations, because every now and then the as-is may not make sense, and that's okay. Right? But that's the point, is that we have to use common sense when we do our final valuation, but at least it gives us some sense of what the market data is telling us when we do this analysis. So, 3 data points that should come out of our multiples that help us explain the difference. Number 1, enterprise value to sales is margin times enterprise value to EBIT. Therefore, algebra, margin, expected margin, is enterprise value to sales divided by enterprise value to EBIT. That was the first one. So here's the thing. When we did Walmart, this is an expected margin based on this divided by that. Okay? Now, think about this. This is a day one perpetuity. I didn't go 10 years out in the future and calculate this. I did it on day one. So what this really means is, over a very long period of time, this should be the average pre-tax margin of the company based on the market price data. Now, when we go to our valuation model, what I'm saying is that is a long-term representation of what we're calling operating income, or EBIT. That's the pre-tax margin as a percentage of sales. So we're kind of getting a sense of what this number is averaging over time. But it's averaging in perpetuity. It doesn't necessarily mean that year by year that always has to be that number. It's just telling us that given the price, that's the mean number over a long period of time that the market must be looking at. So it's not the be-all, end-all of that's my number that I have to put in my model. It just gives us an inference into what is a representative margin of the company, so we have some basis to understand a margin going forward of the company going forward. So that's the first data point that we're getting. Data point number 2, ROIC. This is where we would differ from many other classes, because multiples are based on future cash flows. So most of the time, in order to do our formula, we need, back to this one, we need an ROIC. We need an expected ROIC. That's what this is. We need the expected ROIC. So most of the time, what most finance people would do to get the expected ROIC is they'd go back to the historical ROIC, and by analyzing the historical ROIC, they would come up with a future ROIC. Past predicts the future. What if our company were, pick somebody that's being disrupted, but what if our company were BlackBerry? Their historical ROICs were great, and their futures look nothing like the past because their company's falling apart. What if our company were Rite Aid, which has been struggling for the last 5 years, and for the next 5 years they're probably going to be doing a lot better? So that's why we don't use the past to always predict the future. 8 out of 10 times for most stable, mature companies, sure, the past looks like the future. If I look like Coke in the future and Coke today, probably not going to see a huge difference between the two. But if I'm looking at Panera today versus Panera in the future, that could actually change, right, as they grow and become more mature. So that's what we said. I want to care about the future. So here's the point. We're doing a lot of work because we're using expected data. We have access to these Bloomberg terminals that cost a lot of money to give us access to forward pricing. So what we're doing is we're using this forward pricing. We're putting in all of this data, all of these assumptions for forward sales and margins to basically come up with a forward ROIC. That's why we're going the extra step. We're looking at an expected ROIC, therefore we're trying to predict what that should be in the next 2 years. So here's the point. The market doesn't predict, the analysts don't directly predict and put into the data services an ROIC, right? But they do predict a margin. So here's the margin data. Well, this goes back to the way we set up our model. Our model basically does those ratios in the balance sheet. Those ratios in the balance sheet are the key drivers of invested capital. So if the invested capital ratios stay the same, then we're saying the productivity stays the same. So what we're really saying is if we take the expected margins and similar productivity, then on this screen, the EPEOY, this is the expected ROIC of the firm for the next 2 years. So it's really just a lot of work to get to an expected ROIC. Now, if I'm doing Coke, and I don't really think the expected ROIC is going to be all that different because the margins are pretty similar and the investments are similar, it's probably a lot of work that I didn't have to do. But if I'm doing a company that things could change, then that's actually why it starts to matter more. And I'm not saying that 2 years represents the entire future, but at least I'm starting to see, are there potential inflection points? And I want to come up with an expected ROIC for this company. Probably, if it went from 36 to 39, I could use 39, or I could use 37, or I could use 36. Somewhere in that range is a number I could convince myself to use. Now, again, this is where we got to put our thinking caps on, and we're trying to come up with what we think is representative. But that would be the point. Once we put in the expected ROIC, then we go back and we do item number 3. What is item number 3? Item number 3, what was your solution there? In-class assignment is to figure out the growth. Well, that's the point. We know the multiple. We have a sense of the margin. We have a sense of the ROIC. We have the sense of the WACC. We figured out a representative tax rate. So we basically solve for a G that matches up the multiples. So we're backing into the G. But here's the point. What G are we really solving for? The G that we're really solving for is the assumptions, CVG. Right? So what I mean by that is this is the perpetuity G. In our model, G is growth in free cash flow into perpetuity. It's not growth in sales, and it's not growth in profit. Right? Now, here's the problem. We're proxying out growth in cash flows and growth in sales. But think about this. If a company grows really fast, it's probably going to actually hurt its cash flow because it's going to have to reinvest to grow really fast. If a company shrinks, it might actually help its cash flow because it doesn't have to spend anything on reinvestment. So that's the one problem with proxying out growth in sales and growth in cash flow. So again, back to this point. The G is really this G in the model. What we're really trying to figure out, though, because we're doing a defined period that the multiples aren't caring about, is the 5 to 10 years before we get to that G in the cash flow. And what do those growth in sales look like? And that's what I'm saying. Year by year, it doesn't have to be that G, because I might actually grow at a slightly different rate to get that growth in cash flow. But if nothing else, it gives me some basis for what that long-term G is, and then I can kind of figure out what the actual growth in sales that get me that long-term G is that justify the price. That's the loosest of the proxies. But as I said, if I do a day one multiple, as opposed to a 10-year forward multiple or a 5-year forward multiple, at least it's an apple-and-apple comparison to this analysis. Because in this day one multiple, then this is the day one growth that the company must experience to get to these multiples, right? And that's all we're really trying to get a sense of as to why companies are trading at premiums or discounts. So that's what the heart of this analysis is. So here's the plan. It is right now 4 o'clock. You have between now and 4, we'll call it 4:45, 45 minutes, but really 30 minutes, to basically do a multiples analysis on 2 companies, McDonald's, Chipotle. That's it. You're not doing the full valuation, but you are doing the multiples. See, in a spreadsheet that looks like this, right? You're going to individually turn this in for a grade in 45 minutes with a 10-minute extension, okay? But you can work collaboratively in groups of 2 or 3, because otherwise you won't get it done. There's not enough terminals, so you can work together. All right. So, question? You gotta individually submit. You'll individually submit the Excel files. Same one. Yeah, you can use your partners that you partnered up with. But here's the deal. At 4:30, everybody gets 1 point to your semester grade if you do that. At 4:30, I'm going to ask for a volunteer to come up, and that team will come up and explain their analysis, practice, linking these two together. That's a free bonus extra credit point for anybody willing to do that. Okay, so I'm going to ask for volunteers in 30 minutes. McDonald's, Chipotle, ticker symbol CMG, Chipotle Mexican Grill, and MCD, McDonald's. I know we looked at McDonald's back in September. Don't use that spreadsheet. Data's changed. It's based on current data as of today, November 12th, 2014, for those on video.
Just need that one.
You need a spreadsheet that looks like this, except it's just going to have two companies on it. It's just going to have McDonald's and Chipotle. I'm not caring about anything else, and you don't have to do the full valuation, but you will need the data to get the expected ROICs. You need to do most of the as-is. You don't have to do the entire as-is. Because like I said, I need the expected ROIC, and you'll have to do the as-is for that.
I have a question.
Okay?
I'm in the 2 o'clock session. I'm not going to make it today, but I can do this.
Hold on one second.